Welcome to the Mind Gym Podcast. Jurgen, welcome to the Mind Gym Podcast. How are we doing?
Hey Danny, I'm doing great, thank you.
Good. This is going to be maybe one of the last episodes where I do a season 3, and I'm so happy it's with you. And the reason behind that is I've kind of been a fan of your work for a while. I came onto you actually first time round with Managing for Happiness, and then I was like, oh, let me get all the other goodies what are out there, and then that kind of took me on my adventure with kind of ultimately finding you. But I guess before we get into who you are, Jürgen, I guess maybe for our listeners, what would your log line be? What would be the one sentence what summarizes who you are?
Well, that's easy. I always call myself a creative networker, short and
Okay.
sweet. And then people ask me, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And then I can say, well, I don't believe in knowledge workers anymore because nowadays the halftime of knowledge keeps shrinking. The things we have to put in our heads and remember tend to be delegated nowadays to machines. We rely on the internet and our smartphones to do all the knowledge capturing for us, but we need to apply the knowledge, retrieve the knowledge, and apply it in creative ways. Be more innovative as workers. So I like creative worker, and then I turn into creative networker because I'm very much a fan of networked organizations rather than hierarchical organizations. So that sort of captures these two strands of thoughts.
Nice. A creative networker. I love that. I love it. So before we get into kind of all the good stuff around the work, what you do and a lot of the books and stuff which we can talk about, I ask my guests to pick a number between 1 and 12. Okay. And that number, what you pick, is linked to a list of questions I have on here. So what number would you pick?
5.
Number 5. Okay. Not many people have picked this one. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question, but I don't need the answer just yet. I'll come back a little bit later on. The question you've picked is, what is the one life lesson you learned the hard way? Okay. So that's the question what you've picked, and we'll come back to it a little bit later on. But I guess, I guess some people might be listening to this for the first time. You're gonna maybe have never ever come across you. So maybe give us a bit of a whistle stop tour around kind of who you are and your career from then right back to where you are right now.
Okay, well, I'm originally a software engineer, studied in Delft, in the Netherlands. That's where I'm from. I live in Rotterdam, actually. And my interests have always been very broad. I like marketing and content creation and finance and all kinds of different things. So I was never really the geek or the nerd as other students were that I was in class with. Others were much better at programming, though I loved writing software. Don't get me wrong, but I was just never the best at it, and that made me the perfect candidate to be promoted up to management. I've been a manager for many years, including CIO at a company here in the Netherlands of a few hundred people. And that's where I introduced agile practices, agile principles, because I was a firm believer in agile methods and frameworks and the Agile Manifesto. And I picked a niche of what is the role of the manager in a software organization because it seemed that nobody was really addressing that. I only heard things such as keep the managers away. And I thought that was not very respectful to what I was trying to do. I was trying to do a good job in my role, but I had to figure out what that job was, supportive and initiating and directing and so on. So yeah, I wrote a book on that, and that was a big hit. It sold many, many, many copies in lots of different translations around the world, and that's established me as the one who covered management in the agile space, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I quit my job in 2010 and became an independent speaker, writer, workshop creator, and I have my own little startups since then. Some successful, some not. We could talk about that, about the hard lessons I learned. You you hinted at that, and where I am now is I have something new that I call the unfixed model. It helps people organize their companies with patterns. I prefer patterns over frameworks. Everything is optional, like Lego, lots of different blocks that you can use, but you have to do the building of the method of the framework yourself in your own context. Don't purchase something off the shelf because that rarely works long term. And yeah, that's the newest thing I'm working on. So that's where we are now.
Nice, nice. And there's a lot to unpick there. Um, but I guess the question I've got is before we get into the work what you do now with Unfix and the books and stuff. If I was to go back in time and I was to ask your best friend or your teacher, what's Jurgen going to be when he grows up? What would they have said?
Well, actually, inter- the interesting thing is that my teacher, when I was 11, said to my parents that I was good at analysis, so I should become an analyst or whatever. I had no clue what an analyst was. To be honest, I was 11. What is an analyst? So my mother brought me to the mall and we bought a microscope because we associated that with being an analyst, that you look at things under a microscope. And I thought it was very boring to look at things under a microscope. That was not my thing. But the funny thing is that the last decade or so, I have often been complimented for my talent or my knack at connecting the dots. I always say I fly at a 30,000 feet level. I am not a coach consultant myself. I talk with coaches, consultants. They are my customers. I see a lot of things happening around the entire world. I read a ton and I see patterns. That's what I'm good at. I see the patterns, I connect the dots, and that I turn into creative materials like workshops and books and so on. And I think back that my teacher was right. When I was 11, I am good at analysis. It was just not in the way that he or my mother at the time thought it would turn out. It had nothing to do with microscopes, but it is seeing things that are more clear for me than for other people, and then I help them understand.
Hmm. It's fascinating this dot connector. I spoke with a couple of people on this show, and I've spoke around me feeling like I'm a dot connector. I identify the invisible, and I've used a tool recently called Obsidian. Have you come across this tool?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I found that being really, really helpful in connecting different patterns in my thinking and connecting the things what I can't see yet.
Yeah.
Um, Now, a lot of my, I guess, listeners are from backgrounds in HR, innovation, learning, you name it, kind of big organizations. And I guess the question I have is imagine all these people in these big organizations are in a football stadium, okay? And they're all going to leave this stadium. And you've got a billboard outside this stadium, okay? What's the one message you would put on that billboard for all these people in HR, learning, whatever? What's the one message you want them to see?
Who is your customer and how are you making them happy?
Oh, okay. Go on, explain that a little bit for me.
Hmm.
So, who's your customer? So it's a funny one, this, and I think it's often it's a step you do right at the beginning, but it often seems to be that a lot of people would overjump this step, right? Be going to solution seduction. Oh, we can come up with this great solution without actually really understanding that. And I guess I've had a couple of people on here from kind of, user research, audience insight, employee kind of listening and whatever. And every time I've spoke to them, they've always said nobody really takes the time to understand the customer. Is that something you've seen? Is that kind of a constant, or is it just a case of every now and again people invest in it?
Well, I think it's sort of obvious, particularly in the HR space, because in nearly all organizations, HR is a monopoly. And they cater to the executive team. They see the executive team as their customer and then roll out policies and procedures and whatnot in the organization. I think that is wrong. I think the people in the organization are their customer. And there are only a couple of companies that I have seen that work like that. I have been at a Chinese company called Hire 12 years ago. They are famous for having fired basically their entire middle management layer and turned everyone into entrepreneurs. So they've turned into a company of 4,000 little companies, all operating under the name Hire as a big marketplace offering services both to external customers and internal customers. And that includes HR and finance and marketing and so on. So back then in 2012, when I was there, they told me they had multiple HR units that served the other 3,000. There at the time there were 3,000 micro enterprises, as they called them, that served the other 3,000 micro enterprises and had to compete with each other for the privilege of being able to offer their services. So they understood that their customers were the rest of the company, not the CEO. The CEO didn't care which of the HR departments would be a success or not, as long as HR services or people development support services were being offered in the network. And even better, um, these units were also allowed to offer their services outside of the company as HR by hire for anyone else in China who wanted people's development support. And the rest of the company, those other 3,000 units, if they were not happy with the internal HR units, they were allowed to go outside or external support by HR specialists. So that is a true market. Then you broke, then you break the monopoly of HR. You tell them you have a customer, and that is not the CEO paying your salaries. It is the rest of the company trying to do a better job at building their products and services, and you are part of that problem of how can we serve our external customers better. So that is why I say to HR, who is your customer? If you don't think about that, then you're probably defaulting to uh, behaving as if the CEO is the customer.
Hmm. It's fascinating. I've I've asked this question a few times, and I get a really mixed answer to this. So I tend to say, is HR a friend to the business or a foe to the business? And what I mean by that is, I'm a firm believer that often HR tends to be the gatekeeper, and they also tend to be the biggest bottleneck. Let's be honest. Um, and I'm working with a customer at the moment, and I'm talking around. Look, you're designing products and services, and the world isn't experiences. Like the world is experiences where it is. And then today, I seen the post what you put out there, and it kind of hit home. And it was the one where you talk around, is agile dead? Is agile alive? And there's a bit where you mentioned here. I don't care if agile is dead or if agile is won. There's no doubt that experiences trump products and services, and most of the agile community is still stuck in thinking of product backlog. And then you go on to talk about other models and movements such as design thinking, jobs to be done, human centered design are far ahead of agile. And for me, I mean, I've just released a book talking all about human centered design, so I was like, yes, I was banging that drum. But yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Tell me kind of where your thinking is on that whole kind of piece.
Well, those are a couple of topics.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
First of all, let's start with the first comment you made, is HR a friend or a foe? They should be a friend, but sadly, very often they are a foe. And I think that is because of the problem that I noted earlier, that they don't see the rest of the organization as their customer. They look in the wrong direction. So yes, then they are a bottleneck. Then they become the monopoly that rolls out policies that are not in the interest of people in the working in the organization who are trying to do a good job offering products and services to external customers. But fast forward, the blog post you mentioned, indeed, that I put out today, mentions moving beyond products and services to experiences. Actually, that same company, Hire, is famous for that. I quoted the CEO in that post today, Mr. Jiang. I met him at the time. And he said many companies try to optimize their products. We focus on user experiences. So, what is the experience that a fridge is supposed to offer to a family in a home, for example? Is not about the product of a fridge that you sell. You have to think about what is it that this object is supposed to enable in this household, which is keeping things fresh, keeping things cool, whatever. It has a couple of purposes that are captured in that one object. So you have to start from the experience of the user, and then products serve a job. This is what the jobs to be done community has done in the last 10 years. They have described that the customer has a job uh, uh, to increase their happiness for a little while, or to have a better experience, and your product is supposed to enable that job. That
Mm.
is what your product is for. It serves a larger purpose. And I have noticed, or I notice again and again every day almost, because I'm sort of keeping track of my own experiences with products and services, that there are a lot of organizations that do not understand that it's ultimately the experience that counts and not the product. I'll give you a very recent example. I'm signing up with a new bank. So I quit with a previous bank that annoyed me so much that I canceled my bank accounts and went somewhere else. They got the experience wrong for sure. So I tried another bank, and I downloaded the app, and I said I want a new account. Okay, go through the motions of your name and address, and I scanned my passport and the NFC chip and everything. And then after 10-15 minutes, I was done with all the information. I submit, and the application was successfully submitted. It said, "You will hear from us very soon, within a day." And after 3 hours, I got an email from the bank said, "Oops, something went wrong."
Mm.
Well, if I hear that something went wrong, first of all, I think that a product owner somewhere in the world should lose a finger for the message, something went wrong. I want to know what went wrong. Just tell me what it is that went wrong. And then the message said, please contact our help desk. They can help you. So, of course, I did. I told them I got this message. What do we do now? And they said, oh, no problem. We can onboard you over the phone. And then they wanted to ask me all the same questions. They said, do you have the passport? And I said, no, 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 no. We're not going to do that. I already submitted everything. I want you to find that application, and then we continue from there. And then they couldn't find it. They couldn't find my application in their backend systems. And they said, but no problem. We can do it right now on the phone. And I said, no, this is a problem because you lost the work that I did, that I spent 10-15 minutes on, including my confidential information, my
Mm.
passport data. You lost it. And now you want me to start again? You think I'm going to give you my money if you don't even can keep a hold of, okay, keep track of my passport data? No way. So this is an example of the app itself was fine, and the help desk, they were trying to be very helpful, but those were two different parts of the organization that apparently couldn't work together because the help desk was not able to see the successfully submitted applications in the app. And they wanted to do their own approach of onboarding customers, which they also were able to do. But for me, I'm not interested in either the app or the help desk. I want a smooth onboarding experience. So the experience sucked. The product, the app was could be fine, but I don't care about the app. I don't care about
Mm.
the help desk. I don't care about any specific product. I care about the user experience. They lost my information. I don't want to be their customer. And I went elsewhere. So that is for me the difference between what a product is and what an experience is. And I think the agile community is still very much stuck in product thinking. They're trying to optimize the app. And
Mm.
then when something went wrong, okay, well, we'll send them to the help desk. But that is beyond our concern because the product owner, the product manager, does not cover the help desk. That is somebody else's territory in the bank. You understand? And that is what enterprises, I think, are still very bad at optimizing the entire experience.
Yeah. I completely agree. A couple of things kind of come to mind as I was just listening to you there. We have in the UK we have the train line, um, and they did an experiment, and they said, the train's running delayed, the train's delayed, and then they said the train's delayed because. And what they found is the customer satisfaction went up much more because he said, "Oh, but the train's delayed because there's a cow on the lines or whatever." And it didn't really matter. Like going back to your point, it didn't matter. It just meant that, oh, I understand why there's a problem and where that problem is versus, oops, there's a problem. And it's a fascinating one. I think when I think about experiences, so when I think about how I design, majority of how I design is human centered design. And then I've created, I'm going to use the word framework, but I don't like that word. But I've created approach. Okay. And it is a lot of it is focused heavily on experience designs. And so experiences are created in three levels in my mind: macro, micro, and nano. Okay. And when we think about the nano, it's like the space, sense, the story, and the situation. And then the macro is kind of at a level where it's a bit like a play, a theatre. You have your warm up act, you have your encore, you've got a bit in the middle, and most experiences are like that. And it kind of got me thinking around. There's a whole kind of approach where we move from commodities to products, from products to services, from services to experiences. And I completely on board. I think the experience game is something, and we pay more for experiences. It's proven we pay much more for experiences, but yet it seems like many organizations use the word experience, but when we don't actually apply it, if that makes sense. I'm trying to do the noodles in my head, but it feels like we don't apply it or we don't know how to apply the experience lens onto things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think well, there are some companies have shown the way. I think maybe one of the first to really get it was Starbucks many, many years ago. I
Mm.
mean, we pay a fortune for a coffee. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it is not about the product of the skinny latte or whatever it is that we order. It is the entire experience for me of being able to have a place to sit, to have Wi-Fi,
Mm.
and so on. And they thought about that. Uh, what kind of experience do we want to offer, including the colors and the smells, and so on. And then the products that people buy are just part of that more holistic thing, which is that I'm a traveler. I have half an hour to kill, or an hour. I want a convenient place to sit and work on some emails or whatever. And sure, I'll drink a coffee as I sit there. So that is part of the larger need or desire that I have in that moment. So the job is give me a place to sit for an hour with some kind of beverage to drink
Mm.
because that makes it even more enjoyable. That is the experience that Starbucks offers.
Yeah. 100%. I want to take you down. I want to talk about unfix in just a sec, but I want to talk about um, managing for happiness. And the reason behind I want to talk about that is because for me, it was a really inspiring book for me as a leader. I was like, oh, there is a way to do this differently, and there is a way into how to bring. And it kind of got me thinking. When I was prepping for this interview, it was thinking about the TED Talk, right? You talk about, I think, the 7 bullets of the 7 bullets, I think you call it, and then you talk about the stuff what you did where you let people just write their own job description and kind of ultimately don't even give them contracts. And I think for a lot of my listeners, their head would maybe fall off at the thought of that. But yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about kind of that whole management kind of happiness and the experience you did with the job description, writing your own jobs. I think the listeners would love to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, so my first book was Management 3.0, and that book was half theory, half practice. It was a sort of a foundational piece that I worked on for several years, including lots of references to complexity science and systems thinking and so on, because I thought it was very important. And then the feedback that I got from people was excellent stuff, but we particularly like all the practical chapters. So that's when I thought, okay, for my next book, I will only focus on practical suggestions, things that you can implement the very next week or start experimenting with. And I sort of collected those in a couple of years through my conversations with people and lots of articles that I read and so on. I practically haven't invented anything myself. It was just observation, connecting the dots, as I said earlier. And indeed, I saw that at some forward-thinking companies, people create their own job title. Semco by Ricardo Semler was one of the first in Brazil. There's a couple of books on that company where he described he didn't care at all what people called themselves, and as long as they were happy and contributing to the bottom line of the organization, then everything was fine with him. And I thought, yeah, I have a very similar approach and attitude. I really don't care. I never cared myself either. When I was a manager back then, I remembered I didn't want anything on my business card, no title or something, because I said that enables me to tell the customer anything that they want to hear. Do they want me to be their project manager? Okay, I will be their project manager. Do they see me as their coach or as their technical engineer, whatever? Okay, fine, then I will play that role. I didn't care what exactly the title was or the role that I had in a certain context. I just worked on different products and projects. And internally in the company, most of the time I was chief information officer, but that was not usually how I presented myself in uh, in other contexts. So I like that fluidity of it. Your role depends on the thing that you're doing in a certain project or with a certain product, and don't be uh, such a bore about the exact title that you have, because this is so important to some people. It's ridiculous, and that's what I try to explain in that chapter of on the book.
It's fascinating because I think you there's a piece around where organizations, big ones, want to work like small ones, and small ones want to be big ones, and there's this whole kind of
Mhm.
just this weird dynamic, and I get it, right? This to appetite, um, but I think if I was to go into my I do actually run I call them culture crafter. It's a culture craft, and it's actually close your eyes and write all the things what bug you, like all the things what come to mind now, and write a bug list, and then write a hows and a cows and a wows moment. And basically, all I'm really doing is getting them to identify the bits what they really love about their job, and the bits what they really hate. They hate doing it. I'm like, right, okay, given putting these two together now, how would you write your dream job? And then there's a whole conversation around how can you do more of this and how can you do less of that. And I think what I liked about the happiness, managing for happiness was it kind of distilled it down into really simple language, really simple. Oh, I can try this and learn from it, and I can try it and I can iterate on based on it, which I think is still an untapped art in most leadership books. It's there. It's just lots and lots of theory and a lot of boring stuff. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
Um,
I totally agree because that was also why I wrote that book because I read a lot of management and leadership books and I thought, yeah, on the one hand, I agree with what they write, but on the other hand, it's not very actionable. Like you need to be a servant leader. Okay, fine, sounds great. Now, what does that mean practically on a Tuesday afternoon?
mm,
What does it mean? Give me a description per minute that tells me what is it that the servant leader does. And they were very short on suggestions, the books that I read at the time. So I thought, okay, I will jump into that vacuum and fill it with the ideas that I have collected from organization, the actual stuff that they do, whether it's delegation boards or peer-to-peer bonuses or whatever. I came up with lots of good ideas, kudo cards, and so on.
mm. But it's fascinating. I was chatting to a few people over the week this week, and they're talking about what a good leadership program looks like. And I found myself getting a little bit jaded with this conversation personally. And I'm just like, you're asking the wrong question. The wrong question is why does leadership need to even exist here? Like, what is leadership now? Like you're in. If you look at it from a ladder of abstract, you're down here and there's more value up in the bigger question. Why do we need leadership? What is leadership now? And going back to your point, breaking them down into the chunks, what does that even mean? But it feels like a lot of organizations feel like they need to do a leadership program. And often I'm not really sure they do. Often I'm kind of like, there's a great example of this, Lego. Lego created something called the Leadership Playground, where actually they turned the title of leadership into an act. It's not a title, it's an act what everyone can do. And I just think it's old systems, old legacy thinking, I think, what holds these big systems back. But how does a big system how does a big organization break through that? Like how can it be done?
Good question. You made me think of a comment that someone made quite a while ago, and that thought it was a good one. They said everything's always about leadership, but nobody's talking about followership. Why are there no
Mm,
followership courses or followership programs and so on? Everyone wants to be a leader, and who
yeah,
wants to be a follower?
it's true.
And I thought, okay, yeah, good point. So we thought the whole leadership thing was a bit overrated, and to some extent, I could agree with that. But I think it boils down to persuasion and decision making. As some people said, I don't know who it was, but basically, an organization is a decision making machine. It's a group of people making decisions with each
Mm,
other on a daily basis about everything. How do those decisions get made? What decisions? With whom? And that means that if we want to get somewhere as a group of people that we call an organization, we have to influence these decisions somehow. And that was Daniel Pink in one of his books, who said that maybe 40% of our time we are busy trying to convince other people to make a
mm,
decision. Like, I would like to buy this tool. I mean, I get these questions on my own team, like, "Oh, we need to purchase this tool. Which tool? Which plan do we need for the tool? Who is responsible for this decision? Can we make that decision or someone else involved?" And so on. Like a lot of discussions are about decisions that we have
mm,
to make, and who can make it, and who is involved, and who should be persuading whom. And I think that's what the leadership is about. It is taking charge, moving the discussions in a certain direction, moving the results, the outcomes of the decisions in a certain direction, because you have an idea, or you're supposed to have an idea as a leader, of where we're going. That's
mm,
the starting point, right? Start with why, as Simon Sinek said. What's the point of this group of people? I mean, they're not just random people sitting on a bus. That's not a team. That's not an organization. They're supposed to be achieving something together. What? So that's the starting point for leadership, I suppose, to have an idea of where are we going? Where is this bus driving with us in it, making decisions along the way, when to stop and when to move on and where to go. And yeah, that's why everyone indeed is at some point a leader, because you want to nudge the decisions in a favorable direction, favorable for you or favorable for the cause you believe in, and so on. And everyone is doing that in the whole company.
Mm. I sometimes think leadership's job is an admin job. And what I mean by that is often people, depending on the organization where you work in and how safe you feel in that organization. But I often feel the reason why we have leadership is to de risk decision making. Like, oh, if I had the autonomy and I didn't have a fear or a consequence of me making the wrong decision, would leadership need to be there? Like, it feels like it's a case of we have to push the button down so that if something does happen, there's a fear of a consequence. And I think sometimes, when I work with some of the teams when I'm doing behavioral experimentation, it's a lot of them is complete empowerment. Like, you're not going to get any career consequences, and we're going to run it for like 3 or 4 weeks as an experiment. And I just think sometimes, the leadership, if you could take away that de-risk of making a decision, what would leadership look like at that point? Would it be something wildly different? I don't know. I really don't know.
Me neither, but you have a good point about de-risking decisions. I talk about experiments all the time in the work that I do, and some of those experiments are about figuring out what is the riskiest assumption that we now have in our product design, uh, in our business model, and so on, because we want a high chance of survival as a company. So anything that might go wrong needs to be addressed, and that might require us running some experience in order to de-risk our future. And
Mm.
yeah, so that's part of the equation too.
So I think this is why I'm fascinated by unfix. And I am fascinated. I am quite fascinated. And I love the fact that you go, this isn't a framework, right? In fact, I'm not even going to explain it because I want you to explain it to my listeners. Tell us where unfix came from and what it is.
Well, I have a bit of a difficult relationship with frameworks, and I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with a couple of them, whether it is the Scaled Agile Framework or Holacracy or Scrum or whatever. What they do is basically they capture some good ideas, good suggestions that worked in some places and some organizations, and then offer them as a template to follow elsewhere. And that's where things go wrong, in my opinion, because you cannot simply follow the template as prescribed in a book, because every organization is different. There is, to draw a parallel, there is research I found that proves that not a single uh, um, uh, weight loss program, a standard weight loss program, works for people. What works is when people create their own program from the common sense advice that you find in all those other standard programs, basically. Why? Because every person's habits, their lifestyles, their metabolism, and so on is different from others. What is good for you is not good for other people. Actually, there are things that make you fat but make me help lose weight, or
Mm,
vice versa, because our bodies are different. So you cannot simply come up with one prescribed program to lose weight. You have to break it down into individual components, individual patterns, practices, that make sense, micro solutions, some call them, and then create your own program that fits you as a human being. Well, guess what? Exactly the same applies to organization design, ways of working, and so on. Whether it is Scrum or Safe, etc., they have captured things that work in some other companies but we have to break down those frameworks, and that's what I do with Unfix. That's why it has the name Unfix. I'm trying to decouple it, unfix the rigidness of the frameworks, and break it down into the individual components, the individual patterns, and then allow you to recombine them in a way that makes sense to you. So basically, make your own method. That is the tagline that we often use with Unfix. I want to help you make your own method. And the concept of patterns is comes from a book by Christopher Alexander in the 70s of last century. He was an urban city planner, professor in architecture and urban planning, and he wrote a book about the patterns that he identified in cities that make cities livable, nice places to be, like the town square or the promenade or whatever. There are lots of patterns that every city has. Every city has promenades. Every city has town squares, but they all have them in different combinations. They don't copy each other's street plans because that makes no sense.
Mhm.
London is very different from Rotterdam. It's very different from New York. You cannot just copy the whole metro structure or whatever. Um, but you can copy the concept of a car-free shopping street. We have those in many cities around Europe, at least. That is a useful pattern. People seem to appreciate a car-free shopping street. So
Mm.
this concept has been copied as a successful pattern. And that's the kind of thinking that I do. I identify the patterns that seem to make sense, mention them, make them part of the unfixed model, which is just a growing collection of, I call them Lego blocks to use that metaphor. But you have to do your own building, uh, create your own model out of the components.
I love that analogy. I think and it's perfect. It's perfect for the small to medium, startup, scale ups, and it's perfect for the big organizations. There's many companies who under one umbrella, they all like you say operate like separate companies, and it's perfect. It's perfect for individual sections of the business. How have you got any kind of examples of companies and what you can share, obviously, like who have applied it and you've got some really good results from it?
Yeah, we have a page with the case studies on our website. Uh, I started only a year and a half ago, so it's still very early. The first case studies were actually organizations that already created their own frameworks, their own models, not satisfied with the standard approaches, the off the shelf approaches. And when I looked at what they were doing, I said, well, this is very much unfixed what you have done there. Can I describe that as a blog post with the visuals that I have in my unfixed pattern language? And that the first one was Pipedrive, company in Estonia, where they created their own pipe drive agile framework, as they call it. It is the framework for them, for themselves. They don't tell anyone to copy it. That's not the point. Uh, the message is we made something for us that works for us. You should do the same. Make something for yourself as an organization, and they did the same as what I did. Basically, they looked at what other companies were doing and just copied parts that made sense and created something out of individual components. So I love that as an example. That's why this was the first case study, basically. But then others have come, and if people go to unfix.com/case studies, they will find a Swiss bank and a German software company and large and small, a large Dutch retailer, and so on, with all with their own pictures of how they organize their own ways of working. And
Mm.
as I said, it's still pretty early, a year and a half that we have been working on this. So the case studies are up and coming still. I just heard today there's another one being published next week, which is awesome, from Australia. I heard, I haven't seen it yet. And so that's where we are now, trying to get more examples.
Mm.
People doing things their own way. That's what I love. People showing and being proud of their ways of working. And that's, by the way, that's an interesting thing when we go back to experience. Because I talked about that with my team, and I said, we discussed what is the experience that we want to give people with the unfixed model. Because the pattern language is a product. I mean, that's what we offer. That is available for people in free version. You can download the PDFs and PowerPoint, and there are of course workshops if people want to attend them. That's the product. But what is the experience, the
Mm.
feeling that we wanted people to have? And I thought back to Pipedrive, the very first case study, and I sensed the pride that they had, the feeling of we made something ourselves, like a kid that made something out of Lego, and it is awesome. It's a spaceship or it's a dragon or whatever, and they show it to their parents and look at what I made. They feel proud, they feel creative. And I said to the team, that's the feeling that I want to have. We have to make sure that it's not just the product of the patterns. In whatever we do, we have to give them the feeling that they are proud of their ways of working. That is the end result. That is what our product should enable, a sense of pride of we do things our own way, and we want to show it with a blog post or a PowerPoint presentation or whatever. And that is what we need to enable them to do, to show off their ways
Mm.
of working, basically,
Yeah, I
and
love
say,
that.
this is what we did ourselves.
But I think it's a really good point, right? Like we see ways of working as just this um interaction thing. It's just a thing what happens in work. But actually, you're so right. Like it is a thing to be proud of how we show up. I talk a lot about creating envy. So you create envy in one team, so when the other team goes, "What are they doing over there? Why does that look so good? And what are we doing so different?" And it's exactly that, right? It's that thing to be able to show off and like, hey, peacock, put your feathers up. Like,
Mhm.
there's something really nice. What I guess I want to talk a little bit around. There's two things which are really important, and you touched upon it a little bit earlier for me, where you talk about experimentation. You do. You talk about it a lot. And I used to work for an innovation company, and I introduced them to the celebration grid. Um, and that was like a game changer for a lot of them. Like, oh my days, like, oh this is a different thing. So I guess let's talk about the celebration grid a little bit because I think every single business in the whole wide world should do this. But yet, whether they do it retrospectives, whether they do them or whether they don't, it feels like it's a massive missed opportunity for the learning. So maybe if you could share a little bit about the kind of the celebration grid.
Sure. So the celebration grid emerged out of a book by Donald Reinertson, who writes very complicated stuff that I am barely able to understand about queuing theory and and so on. But I got the gist of his message of running experiments versus repeating good practices and so on. And so I made a picture, a visual. I checked it with him. Hey, Donald, do you think I visualize this correctly? And he said, yeah, yeah, that sort of makes sense. And I was like, phew, wow, awesome. And the visual is pretty simple. It's three columns. The left column says mistakes, the right column says good practices, and in the middle you find experiments, the things that you do of which you do not know whether the outcome will be positive or negative. And learning is optimal when you run experiments. Scientists know this. That's the whole point of running experiments. You want to learn what the outcome is. What if I do this? What if I do that? If you know something is going to work, then it's not an experiment. It's just a good practice. Even though good practices can still fail when there's something in the context or in the environment that you didn't expect. And then you learn, like, okay, so this good thing does not work in this specific case. Well, that's an opportunity for learning. And also doing something stupid, of which you already know that is not going to work, a mistake, can sometimes be beneficial. that actually this stupid thing is a good thing to do in this rare circumstance. But those are, as I said, rare. They don't happen that often. The beneficial mistakes and the sad outcomes with good practices. But in the middle, we have the experiments. That's where learning is optimal, and the celebration grid is just a visualization of what I just said. That helps people to discuss this, and with a lot of success, I hear people applying this as part of their retrospectives, for example, just as a reminder, what are the experiments that we have tried? What are the good practices that we should continue doing? What is the good stuff that we did that sadly failed,
Mm.
but hey, we learned from it, uh, and so on. It's a nice reflection exercise.
Yeah, I think when I read through all your books and the celebration grid, like there's a real magic in the language. There's a real amount in simplifying the complex, not oversimplifying, but simplifying it so that you know it's easy to understand and it's more importantly it's easy to apply.
Mhm.
Um, I guess I'd love to know your thoughts on there's we're gonna hit another wave soon of new leaders coming into the business, and they're not jaded by legacy. They're not, they have no rule book. They've not had to kind of, deal with a certain rule book. What tips would you advise to, yeah, what tips would you give to kind of new leaders who haven't been jaded too much by leadership? How would you help them be the future leaders, if you like?
Well, I very often tell people that they should keep running experiments. That's how I got to where I am now, because I was not afraid to try stuff. As CIO back then, as a manager of multiple development teams, I did silly things. I did crazy things. I was a very unconventional manager. I didn't care doing things the standard way. I was the person who organized dinner with my team and filled out the HR forms with each other, having an open conversation. And then at the end of the dinner session, I signed the forms and shipped them back to HR. HR was happy because I filled out all the forms. My team was happy because we filled out the forms with each other. No other manager did something like that. And I thought, well, everyone's happy, so this seems to be a good good idea. Um, and yeah, so I tried things that others were afraid to try, perhaps, or they didn't come up with the experiment. But for me, the normal is very often not the best way of doing things. It's just the habit that
Mm,
we're stuck with. I question things all the time. Why should we do this like this? Why should we do it like that? And maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another way that's more fun. Because I find it important that we enjoy our jobs, things that are less boring. So try things. That's what I did as a manager. Keep the experiment small. And going back to the celebration grid, actually, Danny, there's one thing that I have changed recently, which is a bit of the language around
mm,
the celebration grid, because in earlier versions I say that the experiments result in success or failure, or the good practices and the mistakes have success or failure. And now I say, actually, that is not the right language. It is positive or negative outcomes. So scientists know that their experiments have positive or negative outcomes. The experiment is not a failure when the outcome is negative. It just means that they have to keep on experimenting. The
mm,
experiment is a failure when the experiment blows up in their face and someone ends up in hospital.
mm.
Then the experiment is a failure. You understand the difference? And the experiment is a failure when it costs you a fortune and you end up bankrupt with the experiment that you ran. So I think that distinction is important, because when we use the word fail, many managers, particularly traditional managers, think in these terms of failure as bankruptcy, things blowing up, things being dangerous. And that is actually a correct way of using the word failure. We don't want these things to happen. We want our experiments to be safe. So I try not to say that the safe experiments fail. No, they just have negative outcomes. We did not
Mm.
want this outcome. Okay, fine. We try another experiment until we have a positive outcome. But the whole process of experimentation should not lead to failure. And I remember the question that you asked me at the very beginning, actually, Danny.
Yeah.
There's one thing that I learned going back to that one. Yes, I'm good at that. Is I spent a fortune on one of my startups uh, that where in hindsight I thought I could have learned the same things with far less money than I put into it. So that is one of the the one of the things that I have learned in my career is that I tend to spend far too much on my experiments. I should reduce the size of them to make them financially much less painful. And that is a very hard lesson that I had to learn about myself, about my approach to experimentation, because I'm not risk averse at all. I have these conversations with my spouse every now and then. I'm the person trying all kinds of crazy, crazy things. And some of those crazy things cost a bit too much
Mm.
financially because I don't care about money that much. And then I think, well, in hindsight, I could have spent that money on other things. Yeah, I should have been more careful in the amount that I threw at that experiment. So that's a hard lesson that I have to learn to keep the size of the experiment small so that I don't fail in the financial sense of running the experiment.
Mm. Nice, nice. I want to be mindful of your time, but I asked you right at the top, um, what would people say you wanted to be when you was a young child? And you mentioned an analyst. But as you know, Jurgen, you never really truly grow up. So if I was to ask you now, Jurgen, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you say now?
Oh, I want to be a novelist.
A novelist.
I have known that I want to be a novelist since I was 14, 15 years old. And I will be a novelist in half a year because then my novel will come out that I am
Ah,
writing right now. So finally, I'm going to make my dream come true.
yes.
40 years since I came up with the dream. And yeah, so that's something that I'm realizing as we speak.
Nice. A novelist. Love it. Love it. Jürgen, where can my listeners stay in contact with you? Where can they follow you? Yeah, where can they kind of stay up to date?
They should just go to unfix.com. Easy enough, just 5 letters, easy to remember, unfix. And there you can find me, my team, the patterns, the visuals. There's a community of, um, of people believing in patterns rather than frameworks. And yeah, I'd love to initiate or follow up on the conversation when people reach out.
Awesome. Jürgen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for the invite, Danny. Appreciate it.